It was supposed to be a simple family vacation. My parents, my little brother Tommy, and I were spending the weekend at this old countryside estate that had been turned into a bed and breakfast. The place was huge, with sprawling gardens, a small lake, and even a hedge maze. I was 16, and to be honest, I wasn't thrilled about spending my weekend in the middle of nowhere with my family. But the hedge maze caught my eye. It looked cool and mysterious, and I figured it might be fun to explore. On the second day, after breakfast, I decided to check it out. My parents were lounging by the lake, and Tommy was busy playing with some toy cars. I told them where I was going, and they just nodded, half paying attention. The entrance to the maze was a tall archway made of intertwined branches and leaves. As I stepped inside, the noise of the outside world faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. At first, the maze seemed pretty straightforward. The hedges were high, about twice my height, and trimmed neatly. The paths were narrow but not claustrophobic, and there were occasional benches and statues that gave it a bit of charm. I wandered deeper, taking random turns, trying to see if I could find the center. It was kind of fun, like being in my own little adventure. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen any of the benches or statues in a long time. The path started to look more similar, and I couldn't tell if I was going in circles. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but there was no signal. Great, I thought. Just my luck. Still, I wasn't too worried. It was just a maze. How hard could it be to find my way out? I kept walking, trying to retrace my steps, but the path seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. Every turn I took led to more confusion. The hedges were thick and dense, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air felt cooler, almost chilly, and a strange unease began to creep in. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me like a shadow. Then I saw the first message. It was carved into the trunk of a tree that was growing through one of the hedges. "No way out," it read. The letters were jagged and rough, as if someone had scratched them in a hurry. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone was trying to mess with me, I thought. Maybe some other guest had a twisted sense of humor. I kept moving, my pace quickening. I just wanted to find the exit and get back to my family. But the maze seemed to stretch on forever, the paths winding and looping in impossible ways. The sense of unease grew stronger, and I started to feel like I was being watched. I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. The next message was even creepier. "Time is a lie," it said. This one was carved into the stone base of a statue, a creepy figure with hollow eyes and an outstretched hand. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. What did that even mean? I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal, and the battery was draining fast. I hadn't realized how long I'd been in the maze. It felt like hours, but my phone said it was only about 45 minutes. As I wandered further, the maze began to change. The hedges grew taller and wilder, the paths narrower and more twisted. It felt like the maze was alive, shifting and moving around me. I came across more messages, each one more disturbing than the last. "The shadows know your name," one said. "Blood is the key," read another. I couldn't shake the feeling that the maze was playing with me, testing me. Panic started to set in. I ran down the paths, turning corners at random, hoping to find a way out. But the more I ran, the more lost I became. The maze seemed to stretch on endlessly, a labyrinth of green walls and dark corners. My breathing grew ragged, my legs aching from running. I had to find a way out. I had to. And then I saw him. A boy, about my age, standing at the end of a long corridor of hedges. He was pale and thin, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of a history book. He looked at me with a strange, sad expression, and then he turned and walked away. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I chased after him, desperate for some human contact, someone who could help me find my way out. I followed him through the twisting paths, but he always stayed just out of reach. I rounded a corner and found myself in a small clearing. The boy was gone, but in his place was a large, ornate mirror. It stood tall and imposing, its surface polished to a perfect shine. I approached it cautiously, my reflection staring back at me. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then my reflection started to change. My face twisted into a mask of fear and pain, my eyes darkening, my mouth opening in a silent scream. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The mirror showed me things I didn't want to see, things I couldn't understand. I turned away, trying to shake the images from my mind. That's when I heard the whispering. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, more insistent. Voices, speaking in hushed tones, saying things I couldn't quite make out. They seemed to be coming from the hedges themselves, surrounding me, closing in. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head, gnawing at my sanity. I ran again, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from the voices, the mirror, the maze. The paths twisted and turned, the hedges growing thicker and darker. The messages became more frequent, more desperate. "Sacrifice is needed," one said. "The maze never lets go," read another. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, a never-ending loop of fear and confusion. Time lost all meaning. My phone died, leaving me completely cut off from the outside world. I had no idea how long I'd been in the maze. It could have been hours, or days. The sky above was hidden by the thick canopy of leaves, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. Exhausted and terrified, I collapsed on the ground, my back against a cold stone bench. I felt defeated, hopeless. The maze had won. I was never going to find my way out. As I sat there, staring at the ground, I noticed something odd. The dirt beneath my feet was disturbed, as if someone had been digging there. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started to dig with my hands, clawing at the earth. I uncovered a small, weathered box, half buried in the dirt. It was old and covered in strange symbols. I opened it, and inside was a piece of parchment, yellowed with age. The writing was faded, but I could just make out the words. To escape the maze, one must confront their deepest fear and offer a sacrifice. I didn't understand. What kind of sacrifice? And what was my deepest fear? I thought about the mirror, the way it had shown me those twisted images of myself. Maybe that was it. Maybe the mirror held the key. I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let this maze beat me. I got up and started retracing my steps, trying to find my way back to the clearing with the mirror. It took a long time, and I nearly gave up more than once, but eventually, I found it. The mirror stood there, silent and imposing, reflecting my weary, terrified face. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The images began to change again, showing me my deepest fears. Loneliness, failure, the loss of my family. I forced myself to look, to confront them. And then I saw something new. A figure standing behind me, its face hidden in shadow. I turned around, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure had stepped closer, its hand reaching out towards me. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This was it. This was my deepest fear. Being alone, being taken by the darkness. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, reaching out with my hand to touch the mirror. The surface was cold and unyielding at first, but then it seemed to melt away, my hand sinking into it. I felt a sharp pain, and I cried out, but I didn't pull back. I had to do this. I had to confront my fear. The pain intensified, spreading out my arm, but I held on. The whispering voices grew louder, a cacophony of fear and despair. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The pain was gone, the voices silenced. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in the middle of the maze, the mirror gone. In its place was a narrow path, leading straight ahead. I followed it, my heart racing. The path was lined with the same dense hedges, but they seemed less menacing now. The air felt lighter, the chill gone. I walked for what felt like an eternity, but eventually, I saw light ahead. The exit. I broke into a run, my legs aching, but my spirits lifting. I burst out of the maze and into the bright sunlight, collapsing on the grass. My parents were there, looking frantic. My mom rushed over to me, pulling me into a tight hug. "Where have you been?" She cried. "We've been looking for you for hours." I looked around, dazed. Hours? It felt like days, but I didn't care. I was out. I was safe. As we made our way back to the bed and breakfast, I glanced back at the maze. It looked the same as before, innocent and unassuming. But I knew better. I had seen its true nature, and it had nearly claimed me. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found that box, if I hadn't confronted my fears. But I did, and I made it out. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispering voices, feel the cold dread of the maze. It will stay with me forever? This reminder of the darkness that lurks just out of sight,